Many people today forget or simply don't know that the internet, the core of the internet, was built on decentralized architecture. And only through time, when mega tech companies, state entities, and other huge organizations got involved and started to build the website layer, then the application layer, did the internet as we know it and all of the data being created become ran in a centralized fashion. As we look towards the future with decentralized AI, we look towards a world where we are re-decentralizing the internet and putting the power of data and value in the hands of the individual. Today's guest, Michael Casey, could not be a better person to talk about this topic, given his extremely impressive background in technology and also in publication. Michael is currently the chairman of the Advanced AI Society and co-authored the book, Our Biggest Fight, on this exact topic. We have an excellent conversation diving into the state of the internet and crypto and AI as we try to take this centralized mess that we currently have and re-decentralize it to put the power in the hands of the individual and the individual entity. I'm very excited for you to listen to this one. This was another one. I say this all the time, but it's so true. I get the opportunity, and I feel so blessed for this, to talk to these incredible minds and pick their brain on these topics. While you're listening, or once you're done listening, if you want to support Brainpower, all that we ask is that you like and subscribe to the channel on whatever platform it is that you're using to consume this. And if you want to be a mega supporter, consider staking more tokens to our Builder subnet within the Morpheus Builder dashboard. Now, with that said, and without further ado, here is Michael Casey.
I'm trying to free your mind, but I can only show you the door. You're the one that has to walk through it.
You're listening to Brainpower.
All right, welcome back to Brainpower, everybody. This is episode 21, and joining me today, I have a gentleman whose background is so extensive and experienced in this space that I didn't quite know exactly where to start, and so there is a no shortage of stuff for us to cover. Michael Casey is joining the show today. He is currently the chairman of the Advanced AI Society and also the co-author of Our Biggest Fight, which is heavily topical for what we'll be talking about today as well. So, Michael, thank you for joining the show.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, Bowen. Thanks for having me.
Oh, of course. You've been on my list. I have a list of people I really want to talk to, and you're on my list. And when I found out we had some mutual connections, so we could make the conversation take place, I was very excited. What I'd love to start with is the Advanced AI Society and the work that you're doing there, because my core listeners are all huge advocates of decentralized AI. I mean, the crux of this show is really the development of DAI, and so I'd love to hear about what you guys have going on.
Well, I would say we're also huge advocates of decentralized AI. That's a defining feature of what this organization is all about. Look, it's been around for a year. We were I founded initially this thing we called the Decentralized AI Society. Since then, there's sort of been a bit of a fork. DAIS is a sort of a much more sort of retail community, smaller project focused thing. And by bringing on Trisha Wang, who is the new executive director or rather the CEO of what we're now calling the Advanced AI Society, the mission has shifted a little bit toward really focusing on mainstream and enterprise institutional adoption of decentralized AI, right? So we see ourselves as a bridge builder, as an organization that will help all the builders of the various pieces of the decentralized AI stack collaborate, establish, tools and standards and, education and whatever else is needed to collectively offer this up as the really only, in my mind, viable alternative to the sort of, I would say, dangerously centralized paradigm that is currently dominating AI. And that's what we're there to just help this community build those bridges to that very important institutional base, the corporate client, if you like.
Well, you said something there, Michael, that I would love to pull the thread on a little bit further. So, and I've actually heard you speak about this on other podcasts that I've listened to where you're featured, and I know you wrote about this in your book as well. This idea of kind of re-decentralizing the internet. And I'd love to just hear you dive into this, because I know that you've stated, and I love talking to people who were around during these early internet days because people
Old
forget.
farts like me, you mean? Yeah.
I didn't say that, but most people, I think, my age and definitely younger, I don't even know if they realize that the internet itself is
Yeah.
made up of decentralized architecture.
That is the ultimate issue in many respects, that the internet is decentralized, and we weren't able to. And this is going to get me really nerding out here, but like, in some respects, the invention of Bitcoin was necessary because there wasn't a mechanism for managing trust, which is this fundamental, institutional need for any system of value exchange in the internet, because it was decentralized, right? That's the problem. We used to have this very centralized economy with all these institutions and certifying authorities and all sorts of entities that would act as the trust intermediaries between us and who we're exchanging with. And all of a sudden we built this wonderfully decentralized thing called the internet, but we couldn't figure out how to value exchange. So Bitcoin is part of that. But obviously money is just one piece of the value problem. And the data and the compute and everything that's sort of the fundamental pieces of the AI economy are just as big, if not more important, expression of that value problem, right? So just want to lay that out, because like when people say, oh, decentralization, that's dangerous, or no one's in charge, it's like, for God's sake, the internet is decentralized architecture. That's its whole point, right? So if we're going to live with the internet, we have to figure out how to build systems that enable on that. So I rant a little bit about this because I think it's amazing how people just they see decentralization as if it's some new crypto thing, but it's the internet.
Well, yeah, I think a lot of people just don't really know how the internet works. It's this magic thing that just exists because it works when I turn my computer on. And so I think a lot of people aren't really thinking about the protocol and architecture layer of how is this information actually getting to me. And then beyond that, decentralization as a brand, let's call it, I think got it's had some bad marketing.
It has,
like it started with this like as much as I not to, I guess, get too hung up on this topic, but most people my age specifically first heard about Bitcoin because of Silk Road and because of Ross Ulbricht and these other things who, by the way, I've talked about this many times on the show. I am so glad that Ross Ulbricht is currently a free man. But that was bad marketing for the technology, and then it kind of has snowballed from there. I mean, we've had, how many like scams, NFT things. Like, we've had so many things that really delude the core message.
A very good friend of mine who most people would probably know in this space. I'm not going to mention it because I'm sure he won't mind. But who is a very successful entrepreneur and investor in this. And you can figure out who this person was. His VC company was called Silk Road before he had to rebrand, right? So yeah, it is one of those sort of problems, and that's also, by the way, why part of this sort of pivot, this fork here, is we've removed the word decentralized. It's simply for branding. It's so that, like, when we can sit down with FedEx or Walmart or whomever to say, look, you should look at an alternative AI model. We're not saying decentralized out of the gate, so that they sort of like have a reason to say no. But I just want to key on one point about the internet as well, right? There is this, the thing was, when we first founded it I wasn't part of that, but when we were all around at that time, people didn't worry about the privacy risks and the trust risks. I mean, they continued to not worry about it, but enterprises and entities that controlled that data recognized the value in sort of trying to intermediate that privacy and that identity challenge, right? Mm-hmm. But beforehand, and I'm just telling you this because I was chatting to somebody yesterday about some research I'm doing for a project that they were talking about their early experiences trying to access internet. They were running an activist network in the 90s, and they were in Ecuador and trying to send messages out to some environmental organization somewhere else. And there was like only 3 people in Quito that had access to the internet, and the guy that had it was the vice president of one of the biggest banks.
Oh wow!
And they called him up and said, "Can I borrow your computer?" And so he went to the top floor of this building in Quito and got access to the vice president's email. and his access to the internet, and then somehow was able to then access the presidents. But no one thought about it. Like, hey, fine, just go ahead and send emails and get all this stuff done because they know you're a foreigner here in town. I'll help you out and so forth. There was no internet cafes. You just did it, and that was unthinkable now that you would gain that level of access. I think it really speaks to what we thought of and the naivete almost of what many of the participants in that early internet were. It was like, it's just an open network and everybody's just going to be nice to each other and share information and it's going to be very utopian, right?
Sure. Well, and before we dive in on the solution for that, which I think we both agree is decentralized AI, I just want to pull the thread a little bit farther too on the centralization of the internet. So now this stuff came to be, and you have these big players who discover, oh, the most valuable thing is data. And then you end up with something like Facebook, and I know there's a famous line that like Facebook's not the product, we're the product for Facebook. So can you talk a little bit about like how did that happen, and how did we get to the point where we have what is now like what we know as Web 2, but is really just a heavily centralized version of data and access to information?
Yeah, look, I think that part of it is just the inherent inefficiencies of decentralization, right? So that, so if you compare sort of both the naivete that I was talking about, no one really thought about the privacy problem at all, and what everybody wanted was easy access to everything. And if you did that, you could certainly have, everyone had their own client, everybody could run their own, run their own web server. In that world, perhaps it would have been fine. We would have figured out some sort of decentralized search mechanism on top of that. But it was prohibitively expensive and certainly not something that the average person could do. And all they wanted was access to information, and they wanted access to communities. Those two things, right? They wanted to be able to share, read, write their own content with each other. And the trade-off was pretty simple. Me, Google, or me, Facebook, I will run all of that infrastructure for you, the hosting and everything else, and you give me your data, and here's all the information you want. And it seemed so simple, but it really was an exercise underneath of just flipping the entire switch on, things like identity management, because ultimately you were sort of like your identity became intrinsically connected to either Facebook, your ID as a sort of a Facebook page owner, or Google, literally your Gmail, everything, and sort of the management of that ID became the responsibility of these entities. So we could have created this entire economy around the business of managing people's ID, not as to the this is where the Facebook reference, which I think was Bruce Schneier who said it.
That sounds right.
Where it comes in is not in the service of the customer, but in the service of the company. And so I would manage your ID for my purposes, not for yours, right? So all of that, I think, was, and it was obviously, in my mind, completely surreptitious and deliberately manipulative and hidden, and people didn't understand and now then they got to the point where they started the trade-off. Oh, okay, I get it, my privacy's not at risk, but so what, I got nothing to hide. And which really wasn't the point at all, right? The point always was Bruce Schneier's point, that you're not actually a customer, you're a product, and that therefore you are being manipulated. That is the entire purpose of this. It's not just that somebody might steal data about your social security number or anything like that. That's not really the point. It's that by owning all of that and not you, you're a pawn. You're a peon, right? You're a serf. And so and I think it's only now that people are finally starting to get it, which is remarkable how long it's taken for the awareness to arise.
Yeah, I mean, I still get this pushback all the time. When I try to talk to people about decentralized AI, one of the biggest pushbacks I get is, well, they already have all my data anyway, so who cares? So can you talk about that a little bit, Michael? Like, why now that we have these AI tools that are being developed and as we look in the not so distant future, and by that I mean like weeks to months at the most, agentic AI, why now is it so much more crucial than it has been for the last 20 years, let's say?
So 2 points, and one of them is this idea of decentralizing the internet to become the internet of AI. Let's put that aside for a moment, because I think that is a really one that we can just dig more deeply into in terms of the architecture. But the other is in fact that interestingly, even though, to your point, is absolutely a truism when it comes to individuals, that people are always still saying, oh, I've already got my data anyway. So that's not the case with enterprises, right? That's not the case with so many companies who've either for regulatory reasons, right? So if you're a medical, anywhere in the health sciences world, you've got HIPAA rules that constrain what you can do with that data, or many times just for business secret reasons. I'm not going to give my data away. This is my livelihood. This is my IP. And by the way, not just my IP, but the IP of all my supply chain partners. And so things like all these efficiencies that we thought we better run across supply chains means we're giving up massive amounts of data to each other and from each other. And so there's still a lot of really valuable data. And I would argue this is one of the biggest problems of centralized AI, is that it could only train on publicly available data, which was either quote unquote stolen, depending on where you sit in terms of the copyright debate that's raging through multiple court cases right now, or was just accessible on the internet because of social media. But social media is not exactly unbiased data, right? It's the product of all the algorithms.
Did you see what the number one source of I saw somewhere that the number one source of information from ChatGPT right now is Reddit.
Right, because they've run out of the data, right? And so maybe Reddit is just continually producing more. But there's bots out there. Sam Altman's complaining about bots now. Everyone's like, so they've got to this point where they're creating the synthetic data. So they're training on their own data, which is creating a recursive problem, which some people say is the driver of the hallucinations. Like, it's a mess, right? Yeah. Where the real opportunity lies is in the data that the enterprises are sitting on. That's where the value is, and not only because of the fact that it will solve the data shortage problem that the LLMs face, but I would argue most importantly, because if we're to focus on why is AI valuable, why do we even care about AI? It's not so that Sam Altman can beat Sundar Pichai or whomever is Demis Hassabis or whomever to reach AGI. Right? To be the one big machine that achieves this, whatever the hell AGI friggin' is anyway, goal, right? And pour as much computing and money and resource into that. It's to solve climate change or find a cure for cancer or make supply chains more efficient. It's actually to do things that matter to the enterprises that are driving the economy around which we live. So unlock that data and we get there. But how are we going to do that? By putting power into their hands. Right. Not into the hands of Silicon Valley controlled massive entities, right? So that's why I think there's a big opportunity, right? So I think that we can start to talk about re-decentralizing by creating these relationships between the enterprises that are sitting on the data and the AIs that can be localized, tailored, privacy preserving, self-sovereign, whatever you want to call it, and can engage with those entities to solve problems, to solve real problems. And forget maybe that becomes AGI. I don't care. I want to find a cure for cancer. That's what I want to do. Right?
Totally. Well, I love this. Okay, so I love this angle, this lens rather, that you're looking at this through, and it also makes sense the move to advance AI society being the focus on the institutional development of decentralized AI. Because when in my day-to-day work that I'm doing within Morpheus and the Morpheus community, it's more so focused on the individual and what they're doing with their own personal agent. But the reality is, and I agree with you, the major early adopters of this are going to be institutions that have massive amounts of data that needs to be proprietary for whatever reason, or they want to keep it private, because it belongs to them and they can monetize it. What this just made me realize, though, especially if we linger on this idea of curing cancer, is it will open the door for I'm sure you're familiar with Balaji and the network nation state concept. Yeah. It will open the door for different network states or network nation states that are organized around different things. Like you could have 10 different research labs that are making decentralized contributions, and they're collectively packaging their data and then offering it to the open market, but they are in control of their own ability to do that.
Absolutely. And what that actually gets us to is a really nice segue to the other half of what I want to talk about, right? So because that world you just described obviously will be a world of AI agents representing each of those different entities and working together in collaboration or swarms or co-op, whatever that is. Mm-hmm. That is an economy itself, right? That's an inter-AI economy or an inter-agent economy, an agentic economy. And if we're going to get there, so in addition to providing the privacy tools for enterprises and all of the decentralized model verification and stuff that we know that we need to do to sort of give those enterprises the confidence to enter into this. We also need to build or rebuild the Internet of AI architecture, right? We need to go back to the principles of TCP/IP and HTTP and all these open protocols that allowed for, the routing of information, the control and the finding, the discoverability, all those components are critical to this. And there are projects like there's the Nanda project that's sort of like working on using Anthropic's MCP, the Model Context Protocol, as a framework for that, but adding all these different layers into it. And we at the Advanced AI Society are sort of bringing our members together to try to help build a kind of a decentralized approach to registries, and so that you can sort of discover different AI agents and they don't have to roll up into some centrally controlled naming system. It's more of a classic, we'll call it a quilt, that there's a standard by which you can sort of standardize the information. So those sorts of ideas are all really a revisiting of the thinking behind, everything that people like Paul Baran and like Dave Clark and obviously Vint Cerf and all those really early founding fathers of the internet were putting together in the early days to give a decentralized architecture. So it's really, I think this is why I think it's an exciting opportunity, right? We've got the unlocking of the enterprises on one hand to really help us solve their problems in the interest of returning the principle of being customers and not products, to customers in this case being the enterprises, right? Solving their problems. And then the other is the need to look at re-architecting this. Because remember, but I mean, I'm a big believer that in the sort of post-web thesis that AI is going to basically render the web as we currently know it sort of pretty irrelevant, an obsolete concept, because why is an agent going to read a website, right? So that's sort of very disruptive and scary for the sake of everybody who built an entire economy on having websites. Mm-hmm. But it's a huge opportunity to go back to square one and say, all right, let's do this properly this time.
Yeah,
right?
I talk about I refer to it as the one app future all the time, where I don't need 50, 60, 100 apps or websites. I will have one thing that I interfaced with that can just access everything else. And it'll look completely different. Ironically, this is a little off topic, but I liked making this point. Ironically, I think human connection, like human to human connection, will increase in this world because we won't be in front of a screen quite as much.
100%. I mean, in fact, I'm also looking to work on that. I have a separate project that's tangentially connected to the Advanced AI Society that we're calling H2H. We think events and things like that are going to thrive in this, but we also think in the midst of that, we need to create self-sovereign proof of personhood concepts that will, and there is new technology coming out of Linux called the first person protocol that will enable this without the kind of scary WorldCoin, biometric piece of it. It's a kind of a web of trust, human to human connection foundation for your proof of personhood, all of which will be valuable for you in an AI world. But we want to build an economy in which you're actually incentivized to build those networks and therefore strengthen the power of that proof through human-to-human connections.
Ideally without needing to scan your eyeballs, yeah.
Well, that's right. In fact, it's all about connecting devices and connecting humans in this physical settings.
Totally.
Rather than any biometric at all, right? So yeah.
I'd love to hear your thoughts.
One last point.
Please.
You mentioned human-to-human. I still, as a writer, as a guy who's lived his life in the content world, I still hope that we're going to go to, whether it's digital or otherwise, but obviously a lot of it still will be digital, websites, if we're going to call them that, to deliver our content. We're still going to read and watch videos and do those sorts of things, right? But the actual searching and buying and, the kind of interactive transactional aspect of the web, we won't have anything to do with that. Our agents will just be, swapping code with each other.
Yeah, but I wonder, even on that point, if I have my own personal super agent and I say, I want to watch the Brain Power podcast, and then all of a sudden the video just pops up and starts playing, I might not even see that it's being hosted on YouTube. It might just be...
So website's probably an outdated word for that anyway, yeah. It's some delivery mechanism. There's just a... Yeah.
Yeah, what that will look like well, there will be some type of delivery mechanism. I guess it's a question of, yeah, what does that actually look like?
It's a, you know, is it self-hosted? Is it still? It's probably, you know, it's obviously going to be hosted elsewhere. So there's that hosting software behind it, and then there's, you know, a streaming technology that's going straight to yours, but it's not a website. It's something.
No, that is a good point. I want to pick your brain on the headwinds that we are inevitably already facing and certainly going to face, and especially as it compares to crypto in Web3, because Bitcoin had this great head start because no one knew about it. Like it had nearly a decade, basically, of development. I don't know, in the shadows is maybe not the right word, but these nation states, these huge institutions were essentially ignoring it. And now they no longer are, but were developed enough that it makes an impact. And I think you could make the same case for Ethereum and the concept of smart contracts. By contrast, DAI is being developed alongside centralized AI. And so there is a focus on these two things right from the jump. And if I'm a centralized AI provider or even a nation state or someone, you know, of bureaucratic authority who actually understands this technology, I would be heavily against it. And so what are your thoughts on that and just those headwinds?
Yeah, it's such a good and meaty and question that probably going to need more time to discuss, because it is ultimately, it is the battle between incumbent interests and those who want to change the system, right? That's always ultimately every battle when it comes to majorly disruptive technology. And it is the struggle that really defines crypto's experience since the beginning of Bitcoin. Whether it is Bitcoin as you want to like bring Bitcoin everywhere, or people building other things, that, you know, remember, Bitcoin's success is still only really successful in the sense that there's an economy of people who've made a lot of money out of it, but it hasn't really infiltrated the world as a currency, as a store of value or anything. I mean, it's still got a long way to go, right? And that is partly because the establishment will always push back against it because it's so disruptive. And I think you're absolutely right when it comes to AI. It's the same thing, right? These are, and it definitely could. You mentioned Balaji and network states. We don't even have to imagine that to think how much of a challenge this is to the power of the nation state. Like it is a very disruptive concept. So you're absolutely right. I think that inevitably breeds a backlash. And so I'm very wary, or at least I'm a strong believer, and I think it was actually David Johnson who sort of first drew my attention to the problems of the Biden executive order that came out, you know, not at the very end of his administration, that really sort of concentrated power in these pre-existing LLMs, because the state was arguing we need to have somebody to call, right? We need to be able to control these guys, and there were limits on you know, there were definitions of how much compute that your AI system had to allow you to bring you into that category of being regulated and therefore essentially legal. And that's just a scary concept, because you're just endorsing these monopolies that have this black box power, and it's essentially the fastest route, in my mind, to totalitarianism, right? It's literally you're going to be endorsed, and we're going to use your services, and God knows what that service is going to be. And so I think you end up with a blurring of the lines. I mean, I was terrified about Elon Musk being in Doge. I think for all the crypto guys who were supporting that, I just could not understand it. Why on earth would you take, you know, what is essentially an AI company and give them complete access to public government data, right? And put that, make that combined entity is scary as hell. So that is a major problem. And so it's one aspect of it. So obviously we need a public debate about this. We need to sort of revive the thinking of the 1996 Telecoms Act, break everything up, open up, and see and show that this is where the value is going to get created, right? So I think how we deal with it is twofold, majorly challenging, and this is why organizations like ours exist, because we can't do this alone. We have to collectively work on things like public education and policy, and I would say a key part of this is actually the monetary model, the ideas of capital and how we think about where it should be distributed across this system. All of that we need to kind of figure out together. But I would say that the only way to ever make real change is to demonstrate that the economic alternative and the incentives associated to that on the other side are so much better. And that's what they were saying in 1996, right? It was a fundamentally important act. Telecom Act created the foundation for the breaking up of the baby bells and the forcing of them to bring carriers onto their networks and enable really the rollout of broadband and everything that happened, because it was a demonopolizing law. And so that mindset, whether it's demonopolizing or whatever function we have to it, needs to sort of be brought into this. And to say the same argument, this is where the growth is going to happen. The economic opportunities that will come out of opening everything up are crazy. Imagine if we can unlock that health data, or we can unlock that supply chain data, right? Think of how much more efficient the world is going to be. Think of all the value that could be unlocked. I think about it in terms of like property rights too, right? Because under the current paradigm, we don't have a property right really over the use of our data, whether it's me or an enterprise, in the global digital economy. I can't use it as a property in the way that I should be able to. But if we establish that, with rights that are tied in with obviously cryptography and confidential compute and everything else, then unlocking property rights has been like a proven means to unlocking value, innovation, and massive wealth creation through every phase in history when we've moved out property rights to what group. So if you can like get the conversation going about how big this opportunity is, then hopefully that stands as an alternative to those who want to make money out of it than the establishment who are resisting it.
Yeah,
so
if we take this to like a really logical extreme when we're talking about property rights and rights to data, one idea that I like discussing with people too is there's a lot of people who are obviously concerned that agentic AI are going to replace their jobs, and there's basically they're not going to need me for whatever reason. And then there's also a collection of people who have historically spoken about this idea of universal basic income. So far, this future that we're talking about is the only future I can hypothesize where you could have something like a universal basic income, but it's not just based on the fact that you're getting it because you exist. You're getting it based on the data that you're creating, which is then being monetized by an entity, a nation state, whoever it is. But you're able to create value, I don't want to say just by existing, but your mere existence and your experiences are inherently valuable. And this is the only way to unlock that.
I think there's probably going to have to be some safety net notion of UBI out there, but I'm not a big fan of it as being the phrase, at least in the way we define how we sort of save humans in the AI age. Because if all it is getting paid for existing, then we're just slaves to the system, right? And I don't think that's where we find our happy place, and the pursuit of happiness is not derived from that. That said, as I said, I think there's probably safety net, welfare net kind of ideas why there should be some base level. I like to think of it more about like giving human beings a bargaining chip in the AI economy. Like, I've got human data on me. I'm owning it. And maybe we form collectives together if we have to around certain things. Again, network states can become entities that become bargaining tools and so forth, so that our data is collectively more valuable. Either way, we're empowered to exercise those property rights in a constructive economic way. We want the AIs to recognize we're valuable, because we're not just recursive synthetic data that you guys are cooking up out of nowhere. We're real, proven human data, and that can be on an enterprise level or an individual level. We've got to get to that point, and then I think we start to think about the economy very differently, right? As long as it's all about making sure that all these things are in place so that the AIs serve us and not themselves. Right. And if that's the case, we will be valuable, because our problems are the ones that AI are going to be solving, not those of some sort of powerful centralized entity that's running the whole system. So yeah, look, this gets really philosophical pretty quickly. But the other thing I want to say is that in addition to sort of the education and the economic argument that needs to go along with that, I really think that one of crypto's biggest problems is atomization and sort of tribalism. And it's not just that we all want interoperability and all that, that we all talk about that problem, but it's really not. It's not that we created these alternative different layer ones that we're all trying to outcompete each other. That's the nature of the economy, right? That's how we do things. But it was more that because I think tokens under this model, particularly when VCs were so involved in funding some of these projects and took token allocations as part of that, inevitably they became a kind of a quasi form of equity anyway, right? And therefore the incentives around expansion and growth became much more narrowly defined around the value of that token. And so you didn't sort of build for interoperability. You didn't necessarily build for utility. You built for sort of token advancement. And that, again, would be okay if it weren't for the fact that the entire capitalist system itself is built around the monopolization of that equity. So you've got $20 trillion in market cap in the hands of the quote-unquote Magnificent Seven, right? The companies that are the same ones that really grew all their wealth through the Web 2 era of us being the product, not the customer, manipulating surveillance capitalism, all that sort of stuff, turned themselves into powerful entities and the controllers of the data on this model, and then converted those into these LLM machines that are now driving them to the stratosphere. That $20 trillion is a war chest. They just acquire whatever new innovation comes along. I don't care whether it's tokenized or not. They'll acquire it eventually because it's the way they protect their moat and everything. That's what capitalism does. And so it's not the problem with it's not the problem with capitalism. Whenever I talk about capitalism this way, so I get accused of being a communist. But I'm a free market. I'm trying to unlock the mechanisms by which free markets work. But if you don't have that in place, capitalism becomes monopoly power, which is another form of political power, right?
Yeah.
Which is why it's totalitarianism, particularly in the AI age. So we need to figure out how it is that we actually distribute the network value across everybody, right, in a legitimately broad way, so that the incentives are not to monopolize control of human beings and entities, but to grow that network itself, right? That's the principle of crypto, right? That like we're all in it together, and when my token rises, your token, so my incentives are to grow the network. That's a wonderful idea. But when you start doing that across multiple siloed entities, it starts to become the same thing anyway. So what does interoperability look like, right? That is a huge question for crypto. I don't want to lose the dynamism and the competition amongst different layer ones and different projects. You need that in some way. That's the driver of growth. But like the capacity to interoperate, and I think it's going to have to roll down to like forms of self-sovereign identity, that you're going to have like proofs of personhood underneath this, and I will now have control over what tokens I control, and that is the sort of like the ownership base layer. And I think we align our data and our compute, because there's a lot of compute that's going to have to go to the edge. Isn't it something about to handle all these centralized data centers processing every single prompt through these? Like, there's billions of agents out there. They're not all going to roll in through OpenAI's one single data set. Yes, you're going to need high-powered data centers for certain machine learning, but a lot of this is going to have to get fragmented out into the edge, and we're just going to have to unlock each other's devices to do that. Well, we should be paid for that, right? We should have a token that represents this on a universal level. And I think if we do that, again, about this property rights issue, where that property right is spread across it becomes impossible for, NVIDIA or OpenAI or whomever to buy up all of those tokens and suddenly control the world again, right? So somewhere along the line, crypto has to start thinking about how do we collectively arrive at true network ownership, meaning everybody owns this stuff together. We have the tools, we have the promise, we have the model to do that, but we don't have the collaborative dynamic in place to do so.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, that gave me a lot to think about. That was an excellent breakdown, though. Two things that came to mind. The first is, and this has been an issue of Web3 and crypto in general, is the user experience, like the learning curve that you need to actually interact with this stuff is very, very high. So it's not only making what you just described, but it's actually doing it in a way that can then be boiled down for the regular person to interact with and be able to consume, which is a whole another rabbit hole of an issue. But the other thing, and this is more pertinent to the conversation that you made me think of, is part of why I got involved in DAI in the first place. So I discovered DeFi around the 2016, 2017 timeframe when I was in school. But what I realized with DAI is crypto web, like DeFi, is not the killer application of blockchain technology. It is a facet of blockchain technology, but the killer application is really the data and the identity and everything being built with DAI, and the crypto portion is a means to an end to be able to accomplish basically what you just described. And the lens is totally different, because now it's not necessarily whose layer one is more decentralized and who's the oracle of truth for XYZ thing. It's how do I maintain my own data, prove my identity, access the amount of compute that I need to do all of these things. And, oh, by the way, maybe this application or decentralized application I'm running touches XYZ layer one, but it doesn't need to be. I guess what I'm trying to say is DAI does not have, in my opinion, doesn't have to have the same tribalism issue that something like a layer one protocol does.
That's a very interesting point. I think you're right. I think so. What this needs us to do, we humans, is to actually sort of rethink our mental model, right? So what is one of the reasons why we have even the word DeFi, right? It takes the word finance, and DeFi comes from money, right? It starts with Bitcoin, all these things, but Bitcoin is trying to disrupt money, and look, that's a massive undertaking. But what is money? Money is information. That's all it is. Money is a form of information. It's the means by which we track each other's exchanges and obligations to each other. Right? I'm not a believer. I'm a believer in that sort of money is dead, actually. But not in the nation state version of that. But just literally, it's our obligations to each other, and we track it. And through that, we create a value exchange system, and that's how we build the world, right? It's a mechanism. There's a store of value component to it that we all have to have so that we can manipulate this. But in a perfect world, that store of value goes away, because what we really want to do is exchange, right? So at its core, it's exchange. And that's information. That's about who did this for that. And it's almost like it's a coding mechanism for what you did for me, and then the rest of the world can see that. So that's data. And so at the end of the day, a value economy, which all economies are based on value, is a system of managing in the safest way possible that enables everybody to do so, the information that they have with each other. So in some respects, particularly as we enter into an AI world, because I think AIs will figure this out. They're like, what the hell is money? Why do I even need money? I need to be able to exchange whatever it is that he's got, that I've got, so that I can do things. Now, I'm talking about obviously far off in the future concept, but these are human constructs. Money is a human construct. So somewhere along the line, we do need to start thinking about what is the purpose of these decentralized architectures for sort of tracking information. There's no money in Bitcoin. It's not like this, we took $1 and put it into Bitcoin. It's just an information exchanging system that we've recognized can create something that has the properties of money. But those properties could be data, it could be anything else, right? So, I mean, this is far out. This is not something that the crypto community is going to get to anytime soon. But I do think that the fastest way is just to sort of get everyone to understand that these rails, these architectures, can enable data exchange, and that data is valuable, and that figuring out how we can do so in a way that doesn't require these massive monopolizing, trust entities in the middle of it is in fact the way forward. And AI gives us the reason to do that. So I think that's a really good point, because getting off the sort of the DeFi or the TradFi or the even stablecoin, all these things are just us bolting onto this very human construct of the world, these other concepts, when in fact we really are trying to live in an information exchange. That's what we need to solve. So yeah.
I'd be interested in hearing, Michael, too, as a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, I mean, we're deep in the rabbit hole, both from a technical perspective and philosophical perspective on these technologies being built. But one thing I struggle with, and I'd love to hear your opinion, again, as somebody who was around during the early days of the internet, is that chasm that you eventually cross where the general public becomes aware of this stuff and ultimately cares about it. Because I'm not going to lie. So last weekend, my wife and I were at a concert, and I pretty much do this every time I'm anywhere that there's a huge population of people. I kind of look around the room, and there's, I don't know, 50,000 people, however, it was a pretty big venue, so however many people there are. And I can't help but think to myself, they don't know. Like, they don't know. Some of them maybe do. I shouldn't say that. That sounds like pompous, and I don't mean it to be that way. But I just mean, like, I actually asked my wife while we were sitting there, I was like, okay, what percentage of these people do you think knows what Bitcoin is? She was like, 90% heard the word. I'm like, okay, if I say proof of work, how many know what that means? She's like, 25. Okay, if I say decentralized AI, now we're down to maybe, 5%. And what did that look like? Bringing it, I guess, all the way back to the early days of the internet, but like, how do we get to that chasm, and how far away are we from that chasm, in your opinion?
Yeah, really good question. I think there are a lot of learnings we can take from it, right? I think part of it is the abstracting away of the infrastructure underneath it, so that, I hope everybody could understand what proof of work is, but I want to be in a world where they don't have to, right? I don't pick up my iPhone and refer to it as a TCP/IP app,
sure,
or, machine, or I don't think about those. I don't get in a car and drive around in my internal combustion engine machine, right? So
that's a great point. Yeah.
So sort of like the underlying infrastructure and machinery that runs something needs to be abstracted away. That's a function of what the UX, that's what technology and app design and so forth is all about, right? And I think we've done a pretty useless job in crypto in doing that, and it's partly because of the interoperability problem as well, by the way. Like, we've had to build so many hacks to link all these systems together, that we've had to, create a lot of awkward UX around it. Whereas, interestingly, AI is not going to care, right? Interoperability is a human problem, not an AI problem. So there's some idea that, like, we can still have all that weird, difficult complexity that has made crypto so obscure and difficult for people, and not worried anymore because the AI is going to, like, abstract all it away for us. Our agent's not going to care about the complexity. We care about it, right? So that's one way of thinking about how this might move forward more readily. But I also think that it's always about the killer app, and the killer app just might be sort of solving one narrow problem that suddenly becomes indispensable, and then that opens up a whole realm of everything else. So I've been thinking a little bit about this lately. I don't know about you, but I would say 98% of the time that my phone rings now, it's a scam, right? I literally, Apple has built the scam likely detector in there, so it mostly says it's a scam. If it's my area code, it's typically a scam because they know it's, that's the way you spoof, right? Oh, 914, that's right. I'm just giving my identity. Westchester, like, that's it, right? And so all of that's just so obvious, and it doesn't take out that much of your day, but every single moment of the day, I have to look at my phone and push, like, delete, or push it off to voicemail or whatever, right? That's happening just inordinately right now. Scam emails, like, there's a real concern. Deep fakes are a very, very real problem right now. They are going to become very problematic for anybody doing KYC, doing, like, all of these things are just going to become broken because AIs are just going to be able to spoof us all over the place. I think that we're just going to have to solve this. We're not going to be able to live safely in the world. It's not just, oh, my data's out there anyway. No, you're going to just be absolutely barraged by scammers, and your ability to handle the truth is going to be at risk. And so deepfake solutions, right? Just deliver that. And there are a lot of them, and they all come down to using, crypto and blockchains for provenance, and establishing rooted identities around the human that produced it, and so forth. We know how to do this. Yeah. And so I think there's, like, deliver something that just really solves a real world problem for people, And then you're like, oh, and the only way you can do that is you're going to have to get this particular wallet that has this particular facilities to be able to you engage with this content in this particular way. And lo and behold, it's a crypto wallet. Oh, you can get paid in this, and you can do this and everything else, right? So, yeah, I think that.
So it's effectively like Trojan horsing people into the technology, which is ultimately, to your point with cars, for example, exactly how it works. I mean, I'm sure a mechanic would roll their eyes at my statements earlier and say, okay, describe to me how your engine works, and I can't do it. And so it's a great point. It's a great point.
But I think Trojan horse is probably too extreme, because Trojan horse implies that that you're duping people, right? I think this is actually, it's lead gen, or it's like the MVP or whatever it is, right? You think of it in those terms, it's like, oh, this is useful, but it just opens up a world of other things that you can do once you have it. I think that's really the point.
That makes sense. So I have one thing, Michael, that I want to cover too before we get out of here, and I really appreciate your time today. Seriously, we didn't touch on the book super directly, but I know our biggest fight touches on a lot of these topics and is around this idea of re-decentralizing the internet and accomplishing really what we've been talking about this whole episode. For people listening to this, what can they do to join the fight? Like what should people be doing? I guess pulling on that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, I will put in a plug for Project Liberty, the institution that my co-author Frank McCourt established, and it's an ever-growing alliance of entities, and they're sort of really trying to work hard with a lot of social media networks that are hewing to the principles, right? So Blue Sky is increasingly coming up with decentralized models of data ownership and so forth, and lots of other social media providers and so forth are rolling into that. So there's going to be like a suite of alternative social media apps and platforms for people to use, while the web still exists and while social media still exists, like go and start using them, right? And start to sort of engage in those kinds of things. That's if you're just a common user. Obviously, if you're a builder, right? I think that in working with people who are solving this particular problem, the ownership of human data, which I think always rolls down to self-sovereign identity. Like, I want builders in crypto, or in non-crypto for that matter, to really build for a self-sovereign environment. Like, start with that as the first principle, that your KYC or whatever you've got for identifying your users rolls down to a privacy-preserving, self-sovereign model, right? That if you have to prove some regulatory standard or whatever, that you do so in a way that doesn't abuse those people, because the tech is there for it. So, and then, like, again, think about how, in doing so, you can add value to those users and give them the capacity to go onto this. Like, I really think that a self-sovereign future is one. There's a whole chapter in the book called rewards, because we use the 4 R's: rights, responsibilities, rewards, and rules. Individuals, social governance, markets, and government, right? The system of governance, to sort of like frame what this future society should look like. And in the market section, the reward section, we see a huge economy that will emerge. Some people like Doc Searle calls it the intention economy, where I own my data and we flip the switch. We're not being surveilled and checked. We're telling the world what we want and entering into a position of bargaining where we're not divulging our identity, we're divulging our intentions, and then we become you're able to. So there's an entire economy that can emerge out of this sort of stuff. And so I think anyone building in this space, looking to like think through what those economic opportunities are, that's what I think is an exciting way to approach these things.
Awesome. Thank you for your input. It's extremely valuable, especially for anyone listening. We don't often get to pick the brains of people that have been as involved in as many of these things as you have. So experienced, wisdom, as much wisdom. Old does not necessarily imply wise, but you are certainly wise, Michael Casey. So we appreciate it. Thank you so much for jumping on. Appreciate this. Thank you so much.
I'm trying to free your mind, but I can only show you the door. You're the one that has to walk through it.
You're listening to Brain Power.